Since the start of the pandemic, employment among people under 25 have fallen by 7%, which is much higher than those of other age groups. For instance, the BBC reported that young people are more likely to seek universal credit now in this post-COVID era, and people have also suggested that, including LSE researchers, have suggested that actually young people have seen a far higher drop in wages compared to older adults. It really does suggest that work has disappeared for young people, and disproportionately so because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is really what we try to unpack in our research. We try to examine to what extent labour market outcomes were disproportionately negatively affected for young people in the post-COVID era, and really sort of try to unpack if the COVID-19 pandemic widen pre-existing inequalities in labour market outcomes.
In our analysis, we looked at the UK Labour Force Survey, which is the main and official source of unemployment statistics in the UK. And then we looked at kind of a big set of data covering 2003 up to 2020 to model the effects before COVID and after COVID. And we then looked at 3 different age groups. So the under 25s, which are typically considered the young people, the 25s to 40s, and the over 40s. And we looked at a number of kind of these key labour force outcomes. So employment, unemployment, and economically active. And then we also unpacked the effects for the full-time employees and the part-time employees. In terms of measures, we kind of started by looking at how do different age groups do fare in terms of employment and unemployment before and after COVID. If COVID-19 has hit all groups equally, we really expect that gap to be similar to what we found in the pre-COVID, but this is not what our analysis has found. Initially, in terms of employment, we found that under 25s post-COVID were 14.5% less likely to be employed compared to those over 40. Before the pandemic, that was 6% less likely to be employed. So just there is a difference in the probability of being employed. And then when we looked at has the gap widened or not, we also found that the gap has gotten bigger. So post-COVID, with a 1% increase in unemployment, we're seeing that young people are 2.5% less likely to be employed compared to 1.4% pre-COVID. So this really does tell us that although there were existing inequalities between ages, that gap has really widened and the differences have been exacerbated with the COVID-19 pandemic. We then tried to unpack this by industry to kind of see if there are some sectors that were more affected than others. And what we found here was that younger people working in public administration, education and health, and also finance and insurance were less likely to be employed during the COVID-19 pandemic compared to older people.
The question then is, how did young people really benefit from the furlough? Because existing sort of reports in the media do suggest this is the case. And we also do pick this up. So we do find that younger people saw less of a change in their work hours, and that didn't really change across groups, and this could be because of furlough. So younger people did benefit from the coronavirus job retention scheme in the short run. In the long run, however, it's not really clear that young people will benefit if they are let go when the furlough scheme is removed. So that's definitely something to watch out for, which policymakers will have to contend with. The second thing is it's not really clear if all young people really benefited from furlough because, for instance, the furlough scheme doesn't cover people who were recently employed or who just started a job. It also, which could be young people. It's also really not clear how the furlough protected those on zero-hour contracts and in casual work, which again tends to fall on the shoulders of young people. Really, in terms of a long-term emergence from COVID, what policymakers and researchers all have to care about is how do we enable some sort of a green recovery and give people, young people especially, opportunities in sectors which can play an important role in this recovery, which ideally should be green and also address issues like climate change.
Something that kind of comes out of our research is also the importance of safety nets and also increasing dignity of work. So Stephen Jenkins' research, for example, at the LSE has shown quite robustly that poverty is not really a set state and that people move in and out of poverty over the years. This is actually really important when we think about strategies of how we can target young people, and also the importance of having a good safety system to support people when they're in these kind of transition periods. Alan Manning's research shows us that setting a minimum wage is really important in terms of removing some of the negative impacts of recessions, and it doesn't really seem to have the negative impact that economists tended to kind of expect in terms of employment outcomes. And this is where setting a living wage becomes really important, because it's not about kind of giving people the bare minimum, but about giving them enough money to live with dignity. So this is a really important area to kind of focus on. How do we get people that are doing these jobs, people who are working in zero contract hours or who are kind of taking on a flexible working or part-time job at the moment, to really have dignity in their work and have enough money to kind of live and the conditions so that they can support themselves. Currently, there are some important discussions going on around setting the level of the living wage and the minimum wage from 2020 onwards. Another point that's actually worth mentioning here is that we already have a solid set of policies in place, but it's really about how do we implement these policies more effectively and how do we implement them for the COVID-19 era. For instance, unemployment support already exists at a local level, and there's a combination of services and advisors that can support people in both education and retraining to go back to work. But what we need to kind of ensure is that the supply of those contractors is certain, that local authorities can actually deal with the spike in demand for unemployment services, so they can really support those young people.
So in terms of emerging from the COVID pandemic in the post-COVID era, an important consideration we'd face both as policymakers as well as members of society is really how do we enable a just and sustainable transition. In this pandemic, we've seen the importance of people in the care sector and healthcare sector, whether they're nurses, doctors, people, and we've also got this epidemic of loneliness, which has been discussed significantly in the UK. And definitely jobs in the care sector would be much harder to automate. So there could be a lot of potential to get young people skilled in delivering care work, which might also be, be able to address parallel challenges that we face. Similarly, when it comes to addressing climate change, a COVID recovery package could involve investing in sectors which can enable a green transition, for instance, in renewable work, where there could be opportunities to employ young people doing both actions which could be skilled, such as product innovation, but also in less skilled jobs in terms of actually setting up renewable energy infrastructure projects, etc. So we have a lot of opportunities, I think, coming forward, but we should be dovetailing labour market policies along with other challenges we face, both COVID as well as other challenges like loneliness, automation of work and climate change, in order to enable a very just and fair and sustainable transition. Any recovery plan should put young people at the centre of policy making and prioritise how they are doing both in the labour market as well as the opportunities for their growth in the future in order to have a sustainable recovery.